So in the last episode, you mentioned that that all interpreters agree that chapter 12
Yeah.
is the central,
Yeah.
essential to the book of Revelation.
Yeah.
Why is that the case?
There's two main reasons. One is simply a grammatical reason, and the other really is the structural reason, a structural theological reason. The grammatical reason is that all through the sort of, as it were, strictly visionary section from chapter 4. So chapter 1, he turns to see the voice as Jesus. Chapters 2 and 3, you have these messages which apparently are from the risen Jesus, though of course at the end of each message it says, hear what the Spirit says to the church, which shows that Revelation theologically is Trinitarian. The words of Jesus are carried by the Spirit to God's people. And then, but in that section from chapter 4, we have this vision of worship in heaven, and you have the vision of the one on the throne, and then it turns out there's not one on the throne, but the one on the throne and the Lamb, what we would call the Father and the Son united there, reigning. All the way through that section, maybe a slight exception of chapter 11, where there's a long verbal account from an angel of the two witnesses. But every vision is structured by "and I saw, and I heard, and I saw, and I heard." These often go together as well. I think I might have mentioned last time about 43% of what John writes is things he hears, not just what he sees. So it's not just a vision; it's also an audition. Again, I think that's distinctive compared with other Jewish apocalyptic. So these are these typical markers: and I saw, and I heard, and then I saw, and I turned and I saw, I turned and I heard, then I, and so on. And then suddenly you get to chapter 12, and all that language disappears. And a great sign appeared in heaven. So the verbal markers have changed, and that sets this section apart. And that's why I think every commentator says that when you get to 12 verse 1, obviously chapter divisions are not always reliable indicators of section divisions, but here in 12 verse 1, there's a distinct change. You've got, at the end of chapter 11, you've got "and I saw, and I heard," and then you've got the hymnic material. Now has come at a time when the kingdom of this world is the kingdom of our God and his Christ. So you've got a hymnic material. So you've got a change of genre and a change of language. But the other real observation is that here you're at the narrative and the theological heart of the text. And you can see part of the reason for that, because we have this sequence of sort of movements from heaven and earth, movements from light and dark, all the way through the text. Revelation is it's like one of those paintings, chiaroscuro is the technique, particularly in Renaissance painting, where you have light and dark contrasting, and that's what you have all the way through Revelation. And you have the contrast, for instance, in the vision of worship in heaven in 4 and 5, and then the sort of vision of the four horsemen in chapter 6, and you have the vision of the people of God in chapter 7. Then again, you have the series of trumpets in chapter 8, and so on. So you get this movement always between the disaster that is life on earth on the one hand, and the amazing vision of what God is doing in heaven on the other. And as you make progress through that, the question is, what is God going to do? The souls onto the altar in chapter 6 cry out, well, how long, O Lord? And then you have a beginning of an answer to that in chapter 7. And then again, this question is begged in chapters 8 and 9. And then you have a bit of an answer in chapter 10. God has raised up a prophet and a prophetic people. And then you get chapter 12. You get this vision of the climactic vision, really, of, what is the problem of evil in the world? And instead of seeing the phenomena of evil in the earlier chapters, you actually see the agent of evil here. This primordial figure, the red dragon, who we are then told is the Satan, the deceiver of the whole world, the devil, that ancient serpent. But we're now, the curtain has been pulled back, and now we see the heart of the problem. It's not just the world has gone wrong, is there someone behind that? And then you also then get to the heart of the solution. So if I'm right, I think the majority of interpreters now would say, in chapter 12, when we get to this poetic section, in the hymnic section, 12 verse 10, then I heard a loud voice in heaven say, now have come the salvation and power and kingdom of our God, and the authority of the Messiah, for the accuser has been thrown down. So here at the central turning point of the text, you actually understand what is the key here. What is the answer? How does this make sense of what we've seen, the previews of, as it were, God's answer previously? And how is it then going to make sense as we head towards the victory that's proclaimed in chapters 19, 20, and 21? And the answer is it all hinges on this. That now, this is the victory of God. This is the defeat of Satan. And what is it? It is the blood of the Lamb, the cosmic victory of Jesus in his death, and the word of their testimony, how that cosmic victory in Jesus is made real in the lives of those who are followers of the Lamb. So that's I think those are the reasons. So there's a linguistic reason, there's a sort of structural reason, there's a theological reason, really, why this sits at the center
Yeah,
of the.
that makes very good sense. But as you mentioned in the last episode, that this chapter is pretty weird.
It is very weird.
Yes, yes. So one of the strange features is actually, like in verse 1 and 2, is that the first thing we ever happen is that we have a pregnant birth-giving woman who appears clothed with the sun and has the moon on his feet and then 12 stars on her head. Why is that?
Well, I should actually, Daniel, I should have already mentioned that all the answers can be found in my Tyndale commentary on the Book of Revelation. But also, I address particular questions on my blog. I've got a tag there which is Revelation, so you can look at all the articles I've written, because they often work together. So sometimes I flesh things out, or I've had further thoughts after the commentary, and I'll post research I've done there. So recently I've been doing work on automata and robotics in the first century in connection with the imperial cult, which actually is useful background for reading Revelation 13 when we get this animated statue that appears to have come to life. So I posted material up about that. So it's partly stuff behind, stuff springing out of the commentary, and also my current research people can find there as well. The first thing is for people to realize what a weird narrative this is. So again, when I'm talking about this, I'm teaching this, I say to people, hang on a second, just look, can I just point out what's going on here? You got a pregnant woman, she's about to give birth, and in front of her is a dragon who's going to eat the baby, all right? Now, this is just a bit weird.
It's very weird.
It is very weird. But last year, I had a fascinating experience because I was teaching a class, again, just mostly ordinary folk, Christians reading the Bible themselves. And when I said, this is a really weird story, and I explained where it came from, one woman at the back put her hand up and say, that's not weird. I know that story. And then she proceeded to tell me the story. She was a woman who lived in Cyprus, and she was over in the UK she was visiting. She'd come to do the study. And she said, we know this story in our culture. Because she was a Greek Cypriot. So we still tell the story. And again, this illustrates how texts look strange when they come from another culture and when that's not your culture and you don't know the basic stuff. I mean, I'm sure you'll find this as well. I mean, there's stuff that we do in UK culture, which if you come from another culture, people just find it weird and inexplicable. There'll be stories that we tell which are unfamiliar. And, some of our stories, some of our folk tales, for example, do come from Europe. So they're shared within a European context. But, the story of Little Red Riding Hood, or the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, other of these sort of proverbial tales, they belong to certain cultures. And if you don't come from that culture, then if I tell the story, they'll think it's really bizarre. Why on earth have you got an obsession with little girls going into the woods and meeting wolves and carrying baskets of apples? It's all a bit, odd, really. Hansel and Gretel. Why is the house made of gingerbread or whatever it is in when other people tell the story? These are odd stories, but if they're part of your own folklore, then you don't really think about them. So I think what John is doing here is he's doing something, again, which actually within our culture we see all the time. So if you open a newspaper, you pick up the Times newspaper, Peter Brooks is the cartoonist there, and he does this sort of thing all the time. What he does is he draws pictures where he takes one story and he exchanges the characters. Instead of having the original character in the story, he keeps the plot, he keeps the shape of the story, but instead he puts in political figures to make a particular point. If you just have a look online for Peter Brooks cartoons, and you'll see that straight away. And again, when I've shown these in slides and I put them up, anyone who's not from British culture finds these cartoons incomprehensible because they don't know the story that Peter Brooks assumes we know, and they might not even recognize the characters either. And this is a very interesting double test for us in Revelation 12, because it relies on two really key things about Revelation. Number one, that it's embedded in first century culture, and particularly first century mythology. Excuse me, and particularly mythology and imagery and ideas that are used in the imperial cult. Number one, and that's strange to us. Second thing Revelation does is it constantly is drawing on Old Testament imagery in depth and extensively. And again, if we're not familiar with our Old Testaments, we'll find that strange as well. And in Revelation 12, I think it's the clearest example of bringing those two together. So when we look at the characters in the story, we've got the woman who's in the agony of childbirth. Where do we find that? We find that in Isaiah 66. We find it in Micah 4, Micah 6. This is the people of God in exile, oppressed and longing for deliverance from God. Badum-tsh. Do you get the joke? A pregnant woman is waiting for deliverance to be delivered. God's people in oppression are waiting to be delivered by God. I discovered when I went and taught this in Kyrgyzstan that in Kyrgyz, that pun doesn't work. But it works in Greek and it works in English and it works in quite a lot of Western languages. We use the same language to rescue someone from oppression and to deliver a woman or a child. We use the same language, deliverance, and that's how the metaphor works here. Then you've got a male child, slightly odd phrase, who will rule the nations with a rod of iron. Well, we know from Psalm 2, that's this son of David, that's future messianic figure who's to come, anointed by God to set his people free and to rule them, to cleanse the temple, to deliver his people, to get rid of sin from the land, and so on. And then you've got a third main character here, which is the dragon. And actually, we're told the dragon is decoded here, so we know in verse 9, the great dragon, that ancient serpent, that's going back to Genesis 3, who's called the devil, temptations of Jesus in the desert, and he's called the Satan, that's from Job and other language there. So we can see these biblical characters. But John has put these characters into quite a different story, and the story doesn't come from Scripture. The story is the Leto-Apollo myth. And the Leto-Apollo myth is, again, if you're from Cyprus or you live in Greece, you'll know the story quite well, and we know it circulated all the way around from about the 2nd century BC to the 3rd century AD. It's a very well-known story. You can look it up online, where Zeus has sex with Leto, who's not his wife. Zeus's wife is really cross about that, and she sends Leto into exile, so the pregnant woman is carried away. Apollo pursues her because, Python pursues her because it's been prophesied that the offspring of Leto will kill Python. So he pursues her, but she's carried away to safety. She gives birth, and Poseidon looks after her. She gives birth under the sea, and then she's brought up to the surface. And the island that she then is on is the island right next to Patmos, it's the island of Delos, next to Patmos, where John is sitting writing Revelation. So again, worth recognizing that this mythology is tied into real places. And of course, I mentioned Python is the one who inhabits the Delphi and is behind the power of the Delphi oracle and so on. So it is mythology which constructs the actual real world that people are living in. And the reason why this is significant and it connects with Roman imperial power is because a number of emperors, including Domitian towards the end of the 1st century, would like to tell this story, and they would tell the story of the chaos monster Python being destroyed by Apollo, who is the one that Leto gives birth to. Hephaestus gives Apollo arrows when he's 4 days old, and he kills the Python, the chaos monster. And of course, Apollo's sister is Artemis, and of course in Ephesus you've got the Temple of Artemis. So again, it's completely integrated into John's world here. And the emperor says, I am the Apollo figure. I am the one who will destroy the chaos monster, who will keep you safe, who will make you prosperous. Therefore, you owe absolute loyalty to me. And of course, the narrative of Revelation is we're going to pantomime mode here, where we say, oh, no, he isn't. He's behind you. No, the one who has defeated the chaos monster is Jesus. And in fact, the imagery of the beast in chapter 13 is a way of John saying, no, the imperial power, the beast has come across the sea and colluded with the beast from the land, the local structures of power in the cities. The beast is the Roman imperial power. So the story is completely inverted, upside down, and it's Jesus who is the Apollo figure, and it's actually the emperor and Roman imperial power which is allied with the dragon and the dragon's power. So it's another way, as all the way through Revelation, of John saying, you cannot be a loyal Roman citizen. You cannot simply bow down to Caesar. You cannot look to Caesar as the one who gives you peace and prosperity, because the person who actually does that is Jesus.
Yeah, that's very powerful when you see the connections here.
Yeah. But you have to go on that detour, that critical detour, into the background, understanding it. Because again, it's worth remembering that Revelation was not written to us. It might be given for us, but it was actually written to people in the eastern side of the first century Roman Empire. So we've got to, if we want to hear what God's going to say to us through it, we've got to first hear what John was saying to those first Christians, those first followers of Jesus.
Thank you for watching this clip. If you enjoyed it, you can find another one by clicking just over here. Or if you want to watch the full episode and dive a step deeper, you can find a link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.